If Belisarius is considered one of the most fearsome commanders in history, why do so many works of art depict him as a pitiful beggar? Now, Belisarius was born around 500 AD in a region that is now present-day Bulgaria. It was customary for young men to go off and join the army and fight for the Byzantine king, and Belisarius was no exception. A life of brutality awaited him. Belisarius joined the Byzantine army in his teens. While little is known about his early training or campaign experiences, he evidently caught the attention of an important figure at a pivotal time for the empire. The Emperor Justin ascended to the Byzantine throne in Constantinople in 518. From peasant origins, the new emperor was perhaps wary of the snake pit of imperial politics in the capital city. He staffed his bodyguard with men from his home province, and one of these was Belisarius. Impressed with the young man's loyalty, the Emperor Justin authorized Belisarius to form his own separate bodyguard regiment. The formidable grouping would be composed of many of the finest warriors of the empire. Pleased with the path his career was taking, Belisarius met someone who would take things to a whole new level. Around this time, Belisarius met a woman in Constantinople named Antonina. Now, she was a well-known figure in the capital's nightlife. Antonina had no shortage of rumors swirling about what she got up to. However, one thing was clear. Antonina had woven a spell on the promising young army officer. Belisarius and Antonina married not long after this. Belisarius seems to have mostly looked the other way while Antonina carried on her social life much as before she was married. But there was one important friend of Antonina's that would soon help Belisarius take the next step in his career. Antonina was close friends with Theodora, the wife of Justinian, next in line for the imperial throne. With the health of the aging Emperor Justin on a clear downslope, it was obvious that Justinian would soon be taking the reins. But he wasn't waiting for the official seal of approval to begin asserting his will on national affairs. Antonina and Theodora were already known for their machinations behind the scenes. When the two became aware that Justinian was choosing officers to lead expeditions to the east to confront the Persians, Theodora immediately recommended that Justinian choose Belisarius. Accustomed to leading his troop of heavily armed bodyguards through the streets of the Byzantine capital, Belisarius looked with renewed vigor at the more challenging task of securing the borders of the far-flung empire. Confident in his skills and looking to test his mettle against the Persians, he headed eastward with his army. Unfortunately, Belisarius's first combat experiences didn't go very well. Persian forces gained the upper hand time after time as Belisarius and other inexperienced commanders struggled to learn the terrain and adjust their tactics. By this time, a long-awaited event took place back home. In 527, the Emperor Justin finally took his last breath. Justinian was now the Byzantine emperor, and he was furious with how things were going against the Persians. He decided to reorganize the command structure, including the role of Belisarius. Anxious to turn the tables on the Persians, Justinian divided the command of his eastern forces into east and north, appointing Belisarius commander of the east. As Belisarius inspected the new reinforcements, he noticed someone who looked out of place. The new guy at the headquarters was named Procopius. Appointed by Justinian as an advisor, he was to accompany Belisarius in the field. Wherever he went, Procopius went. Whatever Procopius saw, he was to record in writing. Looking to take the offensive, Belisarius immediately led his men into Persian territory. They began to construct a huge fortress in what is present-day northeastern Syria. Belisarius calculated that this bold statement would soon draw an aggressive Persian countermove. He was right on that score, but he didn't realize how aggressive it would be. Belisarius thought he had the Persians exactly where he wanted them, but instead, he and his men got sucked into their opponent's web of deception. The huge Persian force dug pits and trenches that trapped many of the Byzantine soldiers. Suffering heavy casualties, Belisarius wisely ordered a retreat. Leading his men away from the field of conflict, Belisarius was determined to even the score. Belisarius and his army met the Persians 2 years later. Knowing that they were vastly outnumbered, Belisarius pondered his options and sent out a letter to the Persian commander offering to negotiate a peaceful solution to the dispute, and he wouldn't have to wait long for a reply. The Persian commander scoffed at the letter and immediately pressed forward to finish off the Byzantines. Already confident in their supremacy, the Persians figured the note was nothing more than an act of cowardice by an enemy ready to throw in the towel. But it was the Persians who were in for the shock of their lives. Getting his behind kicked by the Persians for the previous 2 years had smartened Belisarius up. Using the same methods that the Persians had used 2 years before, the Byzantines used ditches and other obstacles to stymie the enemy before launching swift counterstrikes of their own. By nightfall, Belisarius had mastery over the battlefield, but the sense of triumph would be short-lived. The following year, the Byzantines were pursuing their enemies back into Persia. Confident of victory and eager to confront the Persians before they retreated too far into their home territory, Belisarius' subordinates urged an immediate attack. But Belisarius saw something they didn't. With the confrontation looming that Easter Sunday, Belisarius knew his men, who had been fasting, would be in no shape for fighting. But with his angry men in aggressive overdrive, he also knew it wasn't the time for a full-blown mutiny. Reluctantly, he agreed to go on the offensive. What happened next would haunt him for years to come. There were no masterful tactical moves or displays of brilliance, only a long day of relentless and ugly fury. With their backs against the waters of the Euphrates River, the Byzantine forces barely avoided total annihilation. Although they had inflicted heavy losses on the Persians, there was no getting around the cold reality that they had been defeated. The general was summoned back to the capital to face a charge of incompetence for his setbacks. With cruel jokes about his ineptitude ringing in his ears, Belisarius prepared to face his accusers head-on. Determined to avoid being made a scapegoat, Belisarius vigorously defended his actions. He told prosecutors the attack had been made against his advice. Perhaps Procopius's detailed recording of the events helped Belisarius, but in any case, he was cleared of the charge. Though relieved of the trial's outcome, Belisarius worried about the chaotic political scene in the capital. Various political factions were openly rebelling against Justinian's rule. The rebel groups had taken over the main chariot racing track in Constantinople, and they were gaining numbers. The situation was fast reaching a breaking point, with riots and arsons spreading across the city amid the escalating demands of the rebels. Belisarius received an urgent request from Justinian to disperse the unrest. With his years of experience as a leader of the imperial bodyguard, Belisarius understood the gravity of the situation, and he was about to take drastic steps. Quickly organizing a force of men on foot, accompanied by heavy cavalry, Belisarius approached the hippodrome. When officials' attempts to appease the rebels failed, Belisarius and his men moved in. What happened next would shock the population. The looming tension in the hippodrome finally burst forth. As the rebels scrambled in panicked confusion, Belisarius' forces plunged into the crowd. Once unleashed, the mayhem couldn't be put back in a bottle, but it was only sundown as the dust settled that the full horror of the event began to sink in. It's impossible to know the exact number, but most historians put the toll of victims in the tens of thousands. Though it had been done at a terrifying cost, the uprising was crushed, and Justinian's rule had been saved. Belisarius had also restored his reputation with a thankful emperor. Belisarius was aware of Justinian's dream of restoring Byzantine rule in North Africa, which had fallen under the control of a barbarian tribe called the Vandals. But even he was surprised to hear that Justinian wanted to take decisive action the following year. In the aftermath of that year's riot, it wasn't exactly a carnival atmosphere in Constantinople. However, Belisarius seized the opportunity to go abroad. Smoldering with resentment and with both their reputations in tatters, Justinian and Belisarius agreed that the time had come to show the Vandals who's boss. With Justinian's new vote of confidence, Belisarius began organizing his expedition. But he would get assistance from an unexpected source. All this time, Belisarius' wife Antonina had been keeping tabs on the events. She was aware that her husband's effort in Persia had been sunk by internal squabbling. Through her long association with Empress Theodora, she was uniquely qualified to shepherd her husband through the turbulent waters of political intrigue. Things were going to be different from now on. She was coming to North Africa with Belisarius. With around 20,000 men and a fleet of several hundred ships, the expedition set sail. However, by the time the fleet anchored in Sicily, 500 men had been lost from eating tainted bread. Acting quickly, Belisarius sought fresh bread and clean drinking water from the local population, but their efforts would have been useless without the helping hand of a local ally. Italy at that time was under the control of Queen Amalasuntha. She was just as opposed to the Vandals as Justinian was, and allowed Belisarius to find a safe haven in Italian ports. With her help, Belisarius was able to make crucial stopovers on his expedition. His fleet was at Sicily when he got wind of amazing news. His associate, Procopius, got word that the Vandal fleet was tied up around Sardinia. It was obvious that the Vandals had no idea that the Byzantine fleet was on its way. Having overcome so many challenges just to get this far, and with the morale at a low ebb, the news re-energized Belisarius and his army, and they immediately set sail for North Africa. While many of his officers recommended taking the undefended Vandal capital in a surprise attack, Belisarius decided to come ashore around 160 miles to the east of the city of Carthage. He knew his men's energy and readiness had been sapped by the long voyage, and they would need time to get organized before crossing swords with the enemy. Belisarius set his men on a rapid march to the Vandal capital at Carthage. Moving up to 9 miles per day, Belisarius knew they would soon have to do battle, and learning that there were Vandal forces on either side of him, he made a bold move. Leaving his main force in place to stand against the Vandal offensive, Belisarius held himself apart with a team of cavalry. Choosing the perfect moment to strike, Belisarius and his horsemen routed the Vandals right at a critical moment. The city of Carthage was his for the taking. Belisarius's policy of benevolence had paid off as he and his men took Carthage mostly intact. The expedition had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, but it wasn't long before his success aroused the envy of subordinates. Belisarius's jealous underlings had informed Justinian that he wanted to take over and rule the formal Vandal kingdom for himself. However, Justinian offered Belisarius the option to return to Constantinople and receive a triumph, or remain in Carthage as the governor. Knowing his own lack of political savvy and likely under the influence of his wife Antonina, the general decided to return to the capital, perhaps preferring to keep the empire's most popular general occupied on the far-off frontiers. In 541, Justinian dispatched Belisarius to Persia once again. Belisarius hadn't forgotten the setbacks he'd suffered a decade earlier at the hands of the tenacious and resourceful Persians, and he was itching to have another crack at them. Though meeting with some successes, there were also setbacks, and the situation wasn't made any easier by the arrival in the empire of a terrifying new nemesis. The outbreak of what is now known as bubonic plague in 541 shook the empire to its foundation. The mounting toll of victims was accompanied by a wave of dread across Asia and Europe, but amid the uncertainty, Belisarius saw an opportunity to turn the plague to his advantage. He took the best of his men to a meeting with the Persian ambassador. With the Byzantines armed only with hunting equipment, the Persians thought this was a much smaller unit of a massive force Belisarius held in reserve. This worked, and the invasion was called off with relatively little carnage. Belisarius was acclaimed again for using brains over brute force to achieve a positive result, but the gleam of his greatest victory would soon fade. Belisarius was charged with conspiring to overthrow Justinian in 562. Although the two men had achieved so much together, they were never able to trust each other. Found guilty, Belisarius trudged home to enter house arrest. Now, Procopius published his entire record of his time with Belisarius in his book, History of the Wars. In fact, much of what we know about Belisarius and Justinian comes from this book. But though Procopius seemed to be a loyal advisor to Belisarius, he also harbored a dark secret. Procopius had written another private, unpublished memoir of Belisarius and Justinian. Known now as The Secret History, the book described Belisarius's wife, Antonina, as a promiscuous, serial adulterer, a cheater, and conniving backstabber who emasculated Belisarius, making a fool of him at every turn. Now, the final twist in the Belisarius story is that after he was found guilty with conspiring to overthrow Justinian, Justinian soon after lifted the house arrest. However, tales later spread that Justinian had Belisarius blinded, and that the general had lived his last days as a blind beggar, panhandling on street corners. Works of art and novels would be created depicting this tragic fate, but the story appears to be a myth. It seems that Belisarius was able to find some peace in his last years. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep on exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factinate for more incredible facts about everything.